Perfect. We are recording. Everyone is now aware of that. So I am very happy to welcome you all to today's Learning Collaborative. We are in the second of a series on deployment. So this is deployment 102. This is the during deployment Learning Collaborative. So the one we did a few weeks ago was the deployment 101, and that was sort of the lead up to deployment. What do you do to get ready for deployment? This is a discussion about what happens when you're deployed, what to anticipate, what to think about, what to prepare for. And then we have a third one coming up in November that will address deployment 103, which is what do you do after you're deployed? You know, is there anything that you have to do to kind of re-enter society, re-enter your job, kind of finish up from your deployment, that sort of thing. So welcome to all of you. I would like to take a moment to introduce some of our key leaders in the mix today. And these are folks who are part of the Bureau of Emergency Preparedness and Response here at the central office. And they will also be serving as facilitators for the very short breakout that we're going to do as a part of one exercise in our conversation today. So I'd like to introduce Paula Tambasco, who is our director. Can you say hi, Paula, or wave? There she is. Yeah. Okay, and we've got Pat Riley, who's here with us. Pat is the emergency manager for the organization. Hi, Pat. Glad to have you with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody.
We have Latifah Williams, who is our downstate regional team lead. Latifah, thank you for being with us. And we've got Amy Dubose, who is the Central and Western New York team lead, regional team lead. And then Mike is here with us too.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, Mike Bigley is with us, and Mike is serving in a really neat capacity. He's we keep pulling him out of retirement to come help us and advise us, and he's serving a great niche there. So thank you, Mike, for joining us as well. We also have a few folks that we'll introduce later on who are going to be offering their experiences from prior deployments. Answering some questions for us to bring their expertise into the mix. So we're glad to have all of you joining us as well. And so with that, why don't we wade on in and we'll start the slideshow here. We're probably going to keep you on mute for the most part. You're welcome to unmute if you have a question along the way, but we'll ask that you stay muted just to avoid any distractions and background noises and things like that. But if we are inviting questions at certain slides, please feel free to unmute and either ask the question there, or you can use the chat. And at some point, we'll be using Slido, which is a great fun engagement tool to ask some questions and engage with you there. And I think you'll be able to use Slido to ask your own questions along the way as well. So without further ado, let's talk about our goals for today. So just to go through this, by the end of our time together today, you should have an opportunity to understand some of the challenges that you might face during a deployment. Certainly, you'll understand what the expectations are for how you arrive and the kind of work you're going to be doing. We really want to talk with you in depth about what a shift supervisor does during deployment. And a big reason why we're going to talk about that is because every one of us could be a shift supervisor at some point or another in this experience. We'll talk about a couple of rules, the rule of being together in teams of two and what we call the rule of three. We'll get into that later on a little bit too. There might be some opportunity or some need for some reporting along the way, really recording, the kinds of experiences that you're having, who you're talking with, and who you're interacting with during your deployment. So we'll talk with you about that as well. We want to talk with you a little bit more about travel. We've in some recent deployments, we've noted some folks have had some confusion about that, and we want to clear that up along the way. So we'll spend some time on that. And then we're going to ask our prior deployed folks who have been pre-identified to share their experiences about deployment. And then finally, we'll point you in the direction of some resources. We'll let you know what kind of gear we'll be bringing with us to deployments that you'll have at your disposal as well. So any questions about what we're going to accomplish today? And again, you can put those in the chat, or you can just unmute. And there's also a way to wave your hand. You can raise your hand if you go to the reactions down at the bottom of your screen. You can put your hand up if you want to raise your hand that way too. And hopefully one of us will see that. If we don't, just unmute and scream at us. Okay, so let's talk.
Jen has a question, Skip.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Great. Who's got a question?
No,
Jen?
I don't. I was just messing around with the raise hand.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, you taught us how to do that. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we talked about in the last Learning Collaborative. That was our 101. So we talked about how requests for our help are received, and we note that usually comes from a given county that's been disaster affected up to the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, who really is running the show in terms of the statewide disaster response. And then that gets shunted over to us at OMH, and that's where Patrick comes in. So he's the one that kind of gets those requests for assistance, and then we find our way into some permissions to deploy folks. At the same time, we're canvassing all of you, or those of you that we think are close enough to the area that we want to deploy to see what your availability is. Once we have permission, we have a plan together, who's going to go, what kind of shifts are required, that sort of thing. Then we'll start deploying people. We also talked about a culture of preparedness. And if you haven't heard us talk about that before, this is primarily your preparedness to peel away from your family and your day-to-day work to come and be part of our response. Even if you are disaster affected yourself, or even if your family is, or your workplace is. And we ask you all to consider a non-required training called the New York State Citizens Preparedness Corps, which is available online, or you can do that in person. So we talked about that too. And we really want to just promote this idea that we are all as prepared as possible for disasters. So that makes it easier for us to come away and help other people. Because of course, if your family isn't as prepared, or you're not as prepared, your primary focus is going to be with them and not with us. And we want to support that as well. We talked a little bit about a go bag. Each of you should have by now gotten one. If you went through a recent training, you should have gotten a little string bag with a few items in it, but that of course is not the full go bag. So you may want to be adding things to that. And we talked about that in the first one as well. So your readiness to deploy, what does that look like? Seeking permissions from your supervisor to leave your job, to come away for a few days and help out, things like that. And then we did go over some resources then. We'll do that again today. And then we just want to make sure that everybody has the centralized email for our group. That's the DMH OMH at omh.ny.gov. So feel free to email us there, and one of us will answer you if you have a question. Any questions on what we did during deployment 101 before we move into deployment 102? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll move on. And this is where we get to talk about Slido, because our first slide here really is a Slido. So I'm going to turn this over to Amy to explain how this function works in our presentation today. So Amy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So to get us started, we're going to do a really simple one. Basically, you can take your cell phone and scan this QR code right here. And that will get you directly into the Slido where you can join to answer the questions. And there's also a Q&A option for you. You can also click the link that I just put in the chat, and that will send you to the website. And then you just put in this code, the 3432192. So I think I've talked long enough. Hopefully you're able to join.
I'm going to leave that up just for a second so people have the code.
Yep.
and then
I
we'll
put
flip
the
over to the.
code in the chat as well.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent. So code's there and link is there. So let's go to the Slido slide, and we'll have our first question of the day for everybody.
So
Whoops,
first
there
one's
it is.
super easy. So have you ever been on a disaster mental health deployment? And then if it's a yes, we have a few other options. So if it was to a shelter, if it was to a community location, disaster recovery center, family reunification center. So it looks like we have some yeses coming in. All right, DRC community location.
And just briefly to discuss what some of these types of deployments are, we generally have a couple different types. One is going to be a federal, when we have a federal declaration, that's going to be for a DRC, which is a disaster recovery center, or a family reunification center if it's something with the National Transportation Security Bureau when we have a mass casualty due to a mass vehicle fatality situation. We also do crisis counseling at different state, county, and city level types of deployments. Those are generally crisis counseling centers. And then we may also do things like community resilience centers, or there are times when there is a federally declared disaster where our dishes, IA people, and FEMA will go into the field and do disaster assessments. So those are some of the typical deployments you may look forward to going on.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Pat, and thank you, Amy. I'd like to add here too that, sometimes you won't be assigned to a specific location like this. You'll have maybe a check-in location, but then you may go out into the field following a Red Cross feeding truck into a disaster-affected neighborhood, something like that as well. So we will be asking for your flexibility in figuring out where we send you and where you're needed most once you're deployed.
So
Okay,
this is
Amy, do
great.
you want to facilitate this a little bit?
Yeah, so this is great. So we have 33 people that answered, and then Terry did bring up a good point, that corrections staff do not have access to Slido. So
Ah,
anyone on here, oh yeah, Jen responded. So we do have an extra yes to a community location and to a DRC. We also have another yes to the same thing. So our numbers are actually a little higher, so this is great. So we do have quite a few people here that responded that do not have any experience with being deployed, hence why we are doing these learning collaboratives for
absolutely,
everyone.
absolutely.
So I think there's a lot we can all learn from each other. So that's why we're going to all be communicating and having a conversation.
Okay, well, this gives us a good footing for the rest of our time together. So thank you all for doing that. We have another Slido for you later on. And we have, as we mentioned, a breakout to do as well. Before we get into those activities, though, let's talk a little bit about a scenario that we would like to bring to your attention that we'll discuss as sort of an exercise here. So as we do with any exercise, we identify it as an exercise before we speak about it and then at the end of it. So this is an exercise, we're clear about that. Would anyone like to read this scenario? Let me rephrase that question. Who would like to read this for us?
Can you hear me?
Can now, yeah, sure. Who is that?
Okay. My name is Mary Kuti. I'm from White Plains Service Center, part of RPC. It's an outpatient clinic in White Plains.
Excellent. Would you mind reading this scenario for the group?
Sure. The
Thank you
remnants
so
of
much.
Hurricane Moira have left significant flooding and a hot, humid air mass across Delaware, Greene, I don't know how to pronounce that one,
Harry.
Schoharie, and Otsego counties. The first three counties have requested disaster mental health support at their combination shelter cooling stations, and Otsego County is expected to make a similar request within the next 2 days. Each county is operating one shelter cooling facility. It is expected that 4 responders and 1 supervisor will be needed at each facility for 2 4.5-hour shifts per day, for a total of 40 responders per day. The DMH response is expected to last for 6 days. That's it.
Okay. Thank you for reading that. So this is the scenario now. We're going to need 40 people per day for 6 days for this one. Now, this might underscore our reason for having as many of you trained in psychological first aid and the fundamentals of disaster mental health as we do. So the larger the teams that we have at each of the psychiatric centers or other locations for OMH, the better, because that's a lot of people, isn't it? And we can't be pulling, 40 people out of one psychiatric center. That would keep the psychiatric center from operating. So the more people we have across the state for these sorts of larger scale events, the better. I'll read the next one, which is a little bit further information on this same scenario. So each of the 4 counties, you see populations there. You see 44,000 for Delaware, 48,000 in Greene, 30 in Schoharie County, and 59,000 in Otsego County. Because of this hurricane, there have been 7 known deaths so far, including 2 children. There are still 50 people that are missing or unaccounted for. There are 120,000 customers without power, and it looks like it's going to take about 6 days to get that power back for everybody. There have been at least 600 homes affected, 190 of which have been destroyed completely, maybe even moved off their foundations. 300 have been damaged. There are 110 who have been cut off from services, or they're isolated because of road closures and flooding and things like that. Okay, so this is an exercise, just to be clear. So at this point, we are going to put you all into breakout rooms, because we'd like to have a conversation with you, and we'd like to ask you to come up as smaller groups with your answer to the question that's on this slide. So the question is, based on this Hurricane Moira scenario, what challenges would you expect to face during this deployment? So start to think about what challenges might come up facing that number of people, all of those folks that have been affected, the homes that have been affected, et cetera, right? So before we go into breakouts, I want to explain a couple things. The first is that each one of those rooms is going to be facilitated by one of the folks that we introduced. Some of you will not go into a specific breakout room. Some of you are going to stay in the main room here with me, and I'll be your facilitator. So we're actually going to have 5 breakout rooms plus the main room, so 6 groups. And we'll ask each of you to start off by appointing someone to be a recorder/reporter for your group, so that you can report back once we reconvene on your group's findings, on your group's discussion, right? So have a discussion about this question, and then the reporter or the recorder should plan to regurgitate what you talked about to the rest of the group for 1, maybe 2 minutes. Doesn't have to be very long, just whatever came up for you all, and just let the rest of the group know what that looks like. In the breakouts, you're going to have about 7 minutes, and the way that'll work is you'll have 6 minutes, and then a 1-minute timer will pop up that'll count down to the very end. So you'll have 7 minutes total to have this conversation. So it should be a fairly quick conversation. One thing I'd like to show you before I send you into breakouts is the list of items, the skills that are taught through the psychological first aid program, thinking that this might help you think also about challenges that you might come up against in response to this disaster. So I'll give you a couple seconds to take a look at that. And then I'll go back to this slide. Your facilitators will also need a second or two to share this slide into each of the breakout rooms. So just give them a chance to do that once you get there. So give me just a second here to get the breakout set. I think we are Okay, we are just about ready to go. All right, so there's 6 minutes on the clock plus a 7th minute in the countdown, and we'll see you back here in 7 minutes. Okay, everybody? All right, here we go. That went an ex. Thank you. Forgot about that. Okay, we went an extra minute because the automated process didn't work the way I thought it was going to. So let's talk with everyone and get our feedback from our groups about what we talked about. So the question was, what challenges would you expect to face during this deployment? And just for the rest of you who didn't have the opportunity to do this, I'll just show you the deployment scenario one more time. You see the number of people affected. You see the number of homes affected here. We've got some deaths. We've got some people missing, right? And we've got some road closures, etc. So let's start with group one. And I think that was Amy's group. So who was the reporter from Amy's group, group one?
It was me, Kelly.
Okay. What do you got? What did you guys talk about in your group?
We talked about a lot. So we came up with some of the challenges being road closures, down communications, the time frames from being away from like main areas, like sort of places we're deployed to, being maybe, very distant to getting kind of supplies.
Right.
Lodging for responders, as most of the residents are going to be needing access to that as well. So where are people sleeping? Access for clean water and food, gas for vehicles, maybe making sure on our way in that we've filled up our tanks because there might not be access in the immediate area.
Good thinking.
What to do when you're not on those hours, something to keep yourself bored, because this isn't like that, you can go downtown and shop or anything kind of place.
Right.
Lack of cell service, bringing your medication, being prepared that you might be sleeping on a gym floor or a cot, so maybe bring a pillow or a blanket if you have preferences. Really doing a self-assessment. Are you safe to deploy without power, or and you need a CPAP? Maybe this is not the right setting for you.
Yeah.
Bringing extra clothes, battery backups if you have them, making sure your phone's fully charged before you leave. Ultimately, being prepared for the unknown, but if possible, have someone ahead of time provide information or kind of scope out the place to see what they recommend you bring. And we know that there's usually food and water provided, but if you have specific dietary needs or things that you're going to need, to make sure you're bringing stuff to make sure you're accommodated.
Kelly, a very comprehensive conversation you had, didn't you?
Yeah,
thank you. Nice work. Okay. So let's move to the next group. And what I'll do from this point forward is mention some things that your group came up with that have not been mentioned yet. Okay. So Kelly's group mentioned a lot, and because they were the first group to go, they got to do that. So now we get to fill in some blanks. So let's go to group two, which was Latifah's group. And why don't you tell us who your reporter was there and tell us what you came up with. What were your findings?
Yeah, I just want to say group two came up with some, identified a number of challenges. So thank you all again for participating. Great job. And David is going to share.
Oh, great. Hi, David. David, you may be muted.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
We've only been doing these WebExes for 5 years now. But anyway, yeah. So we were really taking sort of the community's perspective about what the challenges the community is facing that we're going to be trying to support them through. Big challenge: the unknowns. And the need for more information that the community members are going to have. Where are their loved ones? When are they going to be able to get home? Some of those things. And so the need for information is going to be pretty significant. And would it be available to us to pass that along? Is there going to be enough manpower to meet the needs at the centers? It's a significant amount of resources for 4.5-hour shifts per site, across the counties. And so will that be available to sustain the centers? The 4 counties, you know, the numbers that you presented there, 120,000 people without power, you know, 600 homes affected, some destroyed, some deaths. Is there going to be power for the cooling stations? Is that going to be reliable? Who's going to bring that in? Transportation, there's roads and bridges that are affected. How are people that need that going to be able to get to the resource at the cooling center? And some areas, 110 people are still cut off in those counties, so there's going to be resources that need to be made available to them.
Yeah,
communication, yeah, where to go, how to get there, how is the community going to be made aware if there's no power? Is that going to affect internet? Is that going to affect, has it affected the cell phones system? And how are we going to effectively communicate to the community what the resources are available and where they are? Shock that's going to come along with that. There's probably not a lot of folks that have prepared for hurricanes in these areas. And just the cooling, the physical, emotional, the need for cooling. And then it's not only the residences that are affected, but the businesses that the community members need to rely on, the pharmacies, and those other things just to sustain themselves, you know. So that's kind of what we discussed.
Some very deep thinking there too, David. Thank you very much, and I'm glad that you were able to bring up some things that hadn't been mentioned already. So it's going to get a little more challenging to do that as we go here, but thank you, David. I appreciate that. So let's turn now to Group 3. Who was your reporter, recorder? Michael.
Yeah. Thanks, Skip. Our reporter is Angela, who is. I know we were doing like a long, fast list of things. So I'm not, I may come in and help her at the end, but I think she's got it. So
great.
Angela,
so it definitely is harder because so many of them have already been mentioned.
Right.
But you know, definitely having fewer helpers than are needed by the people who need help. Answers to questions. People are dealing with so much loss without being able to provide them with things. Limited access for the staff, thus limited access for the people who need help. Rural areas, maybe some people can't even make it into the center to get the help. We don't know, you know, if there's a way to deploy in the community to them. I'm not sure if that would be an option. Safety of your own safety and your own needs, you know, rain gear, clothing, medication, access to food supplies, bedding, waterproof bags, your own emotional supports. Can you, you know, contact the people that you love, and how might you have been affected by the same hurricane in, you know, your home and your family? Being aware that you're able and emotionally there to support the people in the community. Making sure that you instill breaks and things because it is an emotionally exhausting, and being okay knowing that when you leave the deployment as it's short term, that most things aren't going to be solved in that short of a time, and being okay to just step away when needed.
Yeah, I want to just add a couple of thoughts on there. Thank you, Angela. And Chip, this group was pretty amazing. A lot of the stuff sounds the same, but it started out with not enough staff to deal with this many people, and then went right to how do we identify the priorities? You know, the people who had the greatest losses, or the people that were missing their relatives, or things like that. So there's a whole lot of survivor concern right there in that, and the idea of not being able to stay till it's done. You know, I mean, it was touching. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, that will be a challenge, and that's actually one we'll probably talk about in deployment 103, is how to disengage from a disaster relief that's going to continue after you've left. So thank you for that, Michael, and thanks, Angela.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, let's turn to Patrick and Group 4.
Yes, group 4, we had Rick Kent as our reporter and our recorder.
Great, Rick. What did you guys come up with?
So we've, again, our short list is a little shorter than what we actually had. But limited availability, just thinking from a PFA standpoint, helping people connect to their own resources. Especially, it's going to be difficult, especially if their own resources have been impacted by the hurricane as well. So family and friends that are in the area. For the responder, having to listen to people share what they've lived through, the devastation that has impacted their lives. Came up with some cultural challenges, potentially different languages, different cultures, people doing things differently than the way that we normally would. Being in a new location, I think people might have mentioned that, and that we have to acclimate to a new physical space because we're not from that region. And then the last one, people needing assistance. There's going to be long lines potentially. And so lots of impatience as people are just waiting and need services, and they have to sit and wait until their name gets called.
Right. Rick, thank you. I can tell that it's a little difficult to figure out things that haven't been talked about already. And so I appreciate your willingness to do that. All right, let's flip to group 5, and that's Paula's group.
Sure. Maureen is our reporter, and we had a couple interesting points to bring up that other folks thought about for this scenario and a past one. Go ahead, Maureen.
Good afternoon. So group 5, we spoke about some challenges, for example, having multiple governmental and local agencies all in one place. Residents coming in looking for assistance that we are not providing. For example, looking for resources for their finances, to apply for benefits from FEMA, from the Red Cross, kind of making sure you're not in the way, but being supportive. Wondering where they're going to live, dealing with multiple types of loss. And then right at the end, we spoke about traveling to the site, which I know somebody brought up as well.
Great, Maureen. Thank you so much. And I can tell that your group had a really robust conversation as well. All right, well, last but not least is the group that stayed in the main room with me. So why don't we hear from our reporter there.
Okay, so our group pretty much focused on the survivors, the people we were going to treat. And so a couple of things that probably weren't mentioned. It seems to me like so many things were, but somebody brought up the fact that pets may be missing, so we should do what we can to facilitate the finding of them. There was also a recognition about the weather and the impact of the weather on the people, right there and then, in addition to everything else that they were having to deal with. And also, maybe I can mention the hospitals in the area were brought in insofar as maybe they could be part of the information dissemination, information that we may not have access to or privy to. They might be able to help out with that.
Right. And we will talk a little bit in a little bit about how we get our information. So I'm glad you brought that up too. Thank you. Anything else that anyone would like to add to this conversation? Things that were not brought up that you thought about between then and now?
One of the things I thought about, this is Lauren, one of the things I thought about was, while we were talking, I might have missed it, but was that, especially if you're in a space, like you said, one of the shelter places, temporary shelter places, there's a lot of people. It'll be really good for us to help everybody stay calm. In other words, you might have 1 or 2 people really exciting, screaming, or whatever, and be cognizant of that so that we can keep the crowd at a low level. and be on the lookout for persons who have already have mental or physical disabilities.
Yeah, you can see by this scenario that there are going to be a lot of challenging behaviors, or you can anticipate a lot of challenging behaviors here. So thank you for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. All right, let's move on then. Good job, everybody. I appreciate the breakout. I appreciate your willingness to report, those of you who did that. And we had really good conversations there. So let's carry that forward into the next piece of the conversation here. We have another Slido. So Amy, do you want to introduce this one to us or for us?
Yes, so we're going to do another Slido together. Once again, you can take out your cell phones, and like we already established with our corrections-based folks, you can just put your answers, excuse me, right into the chat, and I'll just read them right off of there. So I'll give you guys a second to rejoin. If you have it open, it should automatically go for you, and you can see the next poll that's going to be brought up. This next one is actually an open text, so you're going to type in your answer.
Okay, so we'll switch to the next slide, and that'll still have the code on it, I think, as well as your access. So
there it is.
Here it is. Go ahead.
Yep. And the link, and you can click in the chat, you can use your phone. So we want to know what types of hazards you might encounter in this scenario. So as we were talking about challenges, we were talking, oh, yep, trees down. I know we did mention a few hazards throughout. I know there's some people typing, so flooding, yep, electric wires, disease, heat, flooding, road closures, roadways.
Yeah.
Yep, chemical, electrical. So yeah, so it's kind of cool. This thing Slido will give you similar words
Oh,
up at
look
the
at
top.
that.
Yeah, so we've had 5 people mention the roadways. We've had 3 people mention wires, water. Keep them coming. This is great.
Yep.
Pollution. Oh, health issues. Yep. Weak structures. That is something really important to talk about, right? With safety, keeping yourself safe, keeping everyone else safe. Lack of facilities. That's definitely a hazard.
Civil unrest looks interesting.
Oh.
Yeah.
I even saw a little bit earlier looting was one.
Looting. I was just going to mention that one. Yep.
And those that went to the drill last week, we did a basic drill, but to cover a lot of this, you would be other layers, right, of law enforcement and other folks present when you're coming to the site. So we're hoping that we can mock simulate that next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm seeing disease.
Oh, the potential for disease. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so again, like we see trees, flooding, water, wires, roads, lots of the similar things. Thank you, everyone. We had 23 people respond. That is wonderful.
That was great. Yeah, good work, everybody. And you're right. These are the kinds of things that are going to be showing up. Sometimes it's as you're driving to the location, you start to see signs of the disaster having occurred. And that can be a little surprising sometimes. Mold, for sure. Absolutely.
And I think that connects, when someone wrote mental illness as well. I think with that, it's access to your medications. That's a very serious hazard, right? Because are we going to have access to the pharmacy to get our medications to keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves well? So yeah, so thanks guys. That was awesome.
Yeah, good work. Lots to be considering there, and lots to be prepared for. All right, so we're gonna flip over to another topic now, and that is, and we're gonna go through this fairly quickly here. This is the role of the shift supervisor. Now, many of you mentioned from your breakout groups that you thought that getting good information was going to be difficult, and providing good information might be difficult because you may not have it. And for that reason, not alone, but primarily for that reason, we want to make sure that you have a sole source of information. So we do that through the incident command structure. This is how first responders and secondary responders, as we're not first responders in this. This is how we maintain some level of management in a chaotic environment, the incident command structure. So we'll encourage you to participate in some training on that as well along the way, just to understand how that unfolds. But the fact of the matter is that really means that everybody on a disaster response operation has one and only one supervisor, and that is their information source. So everybody here could become a shift supervisor, could be assigned to do that when you're deployed. And I want to just kind of reassure you, this is not a heavy lift. It's not a big job. It's just an important one for the reason that we're starting to outline here. You see some of the elements of the job description on the slide here as well. We also have a full-on job description for you that we will make available to you through the SharePoint once that's up and running. But there's going to need to be some sort of communication between shifts. As shifts happen, we'll make sure that you overlap in your shifts by about half an hour, and that's when information gets shared to the incoming shift. So the shift supervisor should be managing that with the incoming shift supervisor and the incoming folks. So there should be some sort of a briefing, right? Figure out where the information flow is coming from, whether it's coming from a shelter supervisor or whoever's running the disaster recovery center, et cetera. Or maybe the sheriff is going to do a daily community brief at 2 o'clock every day, and you'll need to understand that kind of a thing, right? To let people know when and where they're going to get information. If you're a shift supervisor, you're also assigning teams and locations. So if you're not going to be all in one place, the shift supervisor needs to know where everybody is. So just make sure you are communicating with your team, and that if you are a team member, that you're communicating with your shift supervisor about where you're going to be. If teams need support, then the shift supervisor can step in and be a third person when there are teams of 2 that might need some level of support in their interactions, et cetera. Probably the largest thing that you're responsible for if you're the shift supervisor is making sure that your people are taking care of themselves, right? That self-care is super, super important. You can imagine that with all the challenges we have outlined already and identified that, at least every 2 hours, people need to take a break and go do some self-care. We'd even recommend maybe as frequently as every hour. But that has to be happening, and the supervisor is in charge of making sure that that does. In the same vein, you're checking in on how your team is doing, right? How is their mental health holding up under the conditions that you put them in, right? Or that we put them in. And then at the end of the shift, collecting any data that we're asking to be reported. So that might be the number of interactions that people had, or the number of referrals that they made into the community, et cetera. And then, of course, there's that the next shift. If there's another one coming in after you, you would provide the briefing for the next shift to let them know of any changes or any new information that might have occurred. So any questions about that? Fairly straightforward. Once we know who's being deployed, then we will choose the shift supervisors from that group, right? So we won't know who the shift supervisors are until we know who's going. So that's why anybody and everybody should be ready to take on that role. Okay. You can put questions in the chat, or you can unmute if you'd like to ask questions now. All right, we'll move on. So we talked about teams of 2. So let's dive into that just for a bit. Let's say there are 40 people at a shelter, right? I'm sorry, 40 of us at a shelter. It won't be 40. Let's say there are 10 of you at a shelter. We're going to ask you to separate into teams of 2 to do your interactions with survivors, right? So we don't talk about disaster victims so much. We talk about disaster survivors, right? But we want you to operate in teams of 2 for a number of reasons, and they're outlined here. Your safety is the most important, right? Sometimes people's behaviors could make things feel or seem or be unsafe, and we want to have backup in place for you if something like that happens. but also making sure that there's the opportunity for things like taking a break, right? Maybe somebody can be working with someone else while the other team member takes a little bit of a break. If there are folks who are not licensed or don't have a clinical background and there's a clinical need, it might be important to pair a clinician with a non-clinician in this. You don't have to do it that way. You can have two non-clinicians working together. We just want to make sure that when non-clinicians are deployed, that they have someone that they can turn to who is a clinician to support them. So they will always be supervised in some or supported in some way by a clinician on the ground. Sometimes you'll want to take a collaborative approach to your engagement with a survivor. Other times you might want to be one-on-one and somebody's going to need to back out and be a little cautious in terms of overwhelming the survivors. So you'll have to play that by ear a little bit. And perhaps one of the other most important ones here is when you are operating in teams of two, this is a great way to avoid being accused of any kind of misconduct, right? And so we'll talk about that on the next slide. But anybody have any questions about being in teams of two? That'll be typically how we operate, with a little bit of flexibility to that as we go. So what that brings up for us is what we call the rule of three. And that essentially says that there are very few circumstances, if any, by the way, where you should be alone with a survivor. Now, alone is a relative term. Sometimes you have to have private conversations, right? Sometimes you want to be a little cautious about who's overhearing what's going on with these folks. But when we say alone, we mean like not in a closed private room by yourself with someone else. You should never be alone with a child, for example. That kind of thing. Just because we want it to help you avoid accusations of misconduct. So what we'll offer here is that you start with a group of two, a team of two, and you come up against a survivor that needs your assistance. There's a third person. Now you've got a group of three. That's the rule of three. So this can be two responders and one survivor. It could be one responder and two survivors. It could be you with a parent and their child, and you're talking with the child. That's the rule of three in place, right? We don't want you to do things like go for a walk around the building with one person by yourself. We don't want you to go into a bathroom with someone by yourself. We don't want you to go into a private office or a classroom in the school building where the shelter is being held by yourself with a client. You can have that third person near enough with you to let's say within eye shot or earshot, and to be able to be your backup. And one key point here is that because we're all in this together, we really want to invite everyone to feel open to a suggestion that you might be about to be alone with someone, and we're going to help you not do that. We're going to help you avoid that. So you might have someone come up to you and say, hey, I noticed you were about to go for a walk around the building. Would you like someone to come with you? Would you like me to come with you? And the answer to that kind of question is absolutely yes. Thanks for the reminder, right? Yes, please, and thank you. It's not a defensive, no, I don't want anybody here. You can negotiate how close that person is. Yeah, please come with us, but why don't you be 10 steps behind or something like that, just to be a backup, okay? Things like that. Everybody comfortable with that idea that we're open to the suggestion that we might be about to make a mistake in the rule of three, and that we're helping each other to be safe and helping each other to avoid accusations.
Christine has raised her hand.
Great, thank you. Christine, what do you got?
I actually was just trying to get a thumbs up. Click the wrong thing. Yep.
Okay.
Support. Well,
All right.
So Skip, I do have a question. This is David Prost.
Sure. David.
That raises the question about how allegations are handled and reported to whom, normally at the facilities anyway, it's the Justice Center or OMH or other outside organizations possibly. But in these scenarios, what would the process be for reporting something?
That's a great question, David, and it's not one I think I've done a lot of thinking about at this stage, but I think I think I'll give an off the cuff answer, and then we'll look a little deeper into that as we go here. But typically, I think if someone is upset with someone else who's providing a service, they would probably go to that person's supervisor to begin with. But in a shelter situation or in a disaster recovery center kind of a situation, you might have people going and making a report to the shelter manager, or there might be law enforcement at these facilities. Sometimes that happens, right? Often that happens. So they may get the report. What we will do when there is a report is we will immediately, once we learn of it, we will immediately remove the accused from the situation pending an investigation, right? We don't want to continue that kind of activity with the same people in the same place until we've had a chance to investigate. And investigate could easily exonerate someone, or it could substantiate the claim. But we just want to make sure that no one is put in a position where they have been accused and are still in the same environment with the accuser. So we'll adjust on the fly pretty quickly until we have a chance to really figure out what the story is and what needs to be done about that. Does that make sense to you, David, to your question?
Yeah, and I appreciate the rule of three. I think that's very wise.
Good. Before we continue, because that's such a loaded question, I want to invite Paula to jump in here and offer anything around that you might want to add.
So no, you answered that very well. And remember, as responders, we are representing OMH, and so we are covered under that, just like anything else. And as long as we're doing our jobs and our scope of work, we are all doing the right thing. And we can, if folks want to dig into that at a later time, we can dig a little more into that at a later time. But I think your answer suffices.
And you all know that people who are emotionally charged, could potentially have more of a predilection for making accusations too. So that's another reason why we want you in teams of two, et cetera. Okay. And I see Mike mentioning that Kelly has a related issue. We're going to go really quickly because we have to move on here, Kelly. So okay. Ask your question fast. Kelly?
She may be muted.
Okay.
I just put in the chat that sometimes we also need to think about the fact that these are going to be people that are maybe not stable, have just been through a pretty traumatic event. And although we're thinking about the rule of three for the safety of allegations, we also need to think of the safety of being, targeted or being assaulted or things like that.
Right.
It's definitely a two-way street. When you have a team of two, one can be talking to somebody while somebody else is on the phone calling for help. You really have to work that team of two and the rule of three so that there's somebody backing you up. We've been in a lot of public places. It's really always worked out well. So.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. We're going to move on now. Just I'm looking at the time, and we are starting to get a little tight on time. So let's move on to the next topic. And I'm going to turn this over to Pat to talk a little bit about reporting.
All right, thank you, Skip. There is a need for reporting, and it will vary based on the type of situation you are deploying to. Some of our facilities or some of our places that we are deploying to are federal in nature, where there's a federal declaration, and they will have FEMA reports that need to be filled out. If we go into a community, it may not be as standardized and it may not be as structured as far as reporting, but there's always some things we as an agency or we as a team need to know. Those are things like number of interactions, how many people you saw during the day, if you referred anybody back into the community, what types of referrals they may have been, what resources were provided, any problems or challenges you may have had, or any hazards you may have noticed. A lot of this allows us to look at how much longer are we going to need to be deployed. If we're not actually seeing anybody at a DRC, they're going to see other folks. We may be able to lessen how many people we have to have or how long our shifts may be, and as well as the resources provided. Do we need to replenish any resources at the center that may be needed?
Great. Thanks, Pat. Does anybody have any questions about that? About the fact that we might be asking you to do some reporting? And again, that will vary depending on the circumstance. If we're in a federal declaration and FEMA is running the show, there are lots of reports to fill out. If it's just us, we might ask you just to keep a check mark for the number of people that you've seen that day. Okay, let's turn to another quick topic and talk a little bit more about travel. And for this, we're going to ask Paula to present. So Paula, when you're ready, take away. And Paula, I think, may have stepped away.
She did.
So let's go through this. I'll do this for her. So we want you to make sure that you are following the OMH's and the state's travel approval process and travel policies. So I think we have. Does someone have a link that we can put into the chat for that?
I did. It doesn't seem to be hyperlinking. I'll work on that.
Okay. All right, we'll work on that for now. But there are certain policies that have to be followed, and there's certain paperwork that has to be filled out. Everybody might have heard about the BBS-1. If you haven't, we'd like you to get to know that, because that is how you get permission to travel from your supervisor and whatever the chain you have to get above that. I think you have 2 or 3 permission levels that need to sign off on that. So at least get the BBS-1 in process before you leave. You'll have about, I'm going to say, around 24 hours before you actually have to leave once you're deployed, right? So we want you to take the time to get the approvals that you need, because the finance office is going to have a hard time with us if we don't do that kind of thing. The other thing that you may want to start to work on now with your supervisor is getting yourself a travel card, a T card, and that you can get through that link that I think Latifa was able to share now as well. So please do everything you can to follow travel policy. That may mean that you are renting a car or that you are taking the time to secure a state car. We will not necessarily be able to guarantee that mileage will be paid if you're using your private vehicle to go. So you want to take the time to ensure that you know where you're going to be staying. Maybe you even have to set up your own hotel, right? So we'll tell you whether you're setting up your hotel or whether you are going to stay, let's say, in a staff shelter or something like that. But you're going to be responsible for managing your own travel, reporting your own travel, etc. So you need to be able to follow the state policies on that. A little bit more information. So this is specifically about your mileage. There is no guarantee that the state will cover your mileage in your personal vehicle. We would prefer that you use either a state vehicle if there's one available, or that you rent one. And I think, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong here, that's done through Concur. Is that correct?
Yes, generally we're using the state travel agent.
Okay, yeah, which is the Concur organization, and that's an online program that you can use. It's very easy to use and set up, but it may be helpful for you to get all that set up in advance. So, Latifa, can you just help me know that that link is working now, or no? Where are we?
Amy was able to place it in the chat.
Okay, excellent.
And if anybody needs it afterward, just let us know. Email the DMH mailbox and we can send it to you.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, we've got a few minutes left here, and we'd like to spend some time with some folks who have been deployed and ask them a couple of questions. So we have 3 folks that Latifa is going to introduce, and we're going to ask them to essentially answer 2 questions. And I'm going to say, folks, we're going to do this fairly quickly now, okay? So the first question is, on your first OMH deployment, what do you remember being surprised by? And then can you identify a takeaway from that deployment that really has practical experience for everyone else that's on the call today? What could they take away from your experience that they can learn for their next deployment. So Latifa, do you want to introduce our guests today?
Sure. So thank you all for participating, and thank you to Dr. Maravella Tasato, to Monty Posner, and Christine Bartholomew. I hope I said that correctly. What we're going to ask you to do, again, as Skip just mentioned, is if you could just respond to the questions below. And Dr. Tasato, I'm going to ask you to please go first. You mentioned you would talk about the 2006 Delaware Gap flooding. And so I will, please introduce yourself, and I will let you go ahead and answer those two questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Maribel Tesaro. Hi, everyone. I can tell you, I was quite surprised of how well organized it was, and it was my first deployment. So I felt like the training they gave me at that time, which was very early, it came to life. And so I appreciated that. We had a great shift site manager. This involved FEMA as well. So we were at a DRC center, Identify Center. So, you know, we had the morning debriefings, the end of the shift debriefings. The layout was really great. It was very well organized. I was just surprised of how well and how huge it was too. There was like so many agencies at this one site. And you know, here we are, a little OMH site in the back of the center of the room. And it's funny, I said, why are we back there all by ourselves? But it made sense. You know, people might want a space and have a quiet area to talk to. And I kind of then appreciate the thoughtfulness of it. But I said the greatest thing for me, like I said, was the organization, great site supervisor, great collaboration. So I'm glad that was my first experience. The takeaway from the OMH that has practical applications to share with us: be flexible, work the room, pay attention to the surroundings, be useful. And it doesn't just mean you being back there. I speak a second language. I help with translation. I kind of helped ease anxiety as people were working with other providers. The other responders, whether they worked for FEMA or they worked for the police department, a bank, they also sought me out. So if they needed my help for one reason or the other, whether it was for mental health, whether it was for translation, whether for just to kind of help someone's anxiety in the moment dealing with the providers and gathering information. So those are my takeaways. Was I brief and concise?
Thank you.
Right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And also, if there are any questions, we're going to ask you to just hold them. We want to give time to our presenters, and then we're going to wrap up. Monty, please briefly introduce yourself and share. You're going to discuss 2011, the Tropical Storm Lee.
Okay. Looks like some bunch of us have the same office interior that's designed by Corecraft. Amazing. It's amazing. So I chose to talk about Tropical Storm Lee because I actually had 3 separate deployments, and the locations were quite different and the environment was quite different. So the first deployment I was at Orange County Fire Academy, which I believe my memory was not too far from Mid-Hudson Forensic, if I'm not mistaken. I know it was around there.
It's right across the street.
I knew it was around there. See that? I remember I said, that's Mid-Hudson. Wow, I never saw it before. What was amazing about that is there was so many moving parts. And I didn't realize that the Office of Family and Children's Services has a subdivision that they set these things up, and they do this all the time, which I never knew about. And I had an opportunity to talk to different state agencies and what they do. So that was one of the surprises. They also took very good care of us. They gave us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it was really, they really were quite nice, and everything was there. But the thing that I learned from the beginning of that deployment is the first day I sat there, I was by myself. I didn't have a partner. And I sat at this table that says New York State Office of Mental Health. Nobody talked to me. And I knew why, okay? And I said, I'm going to change that. So the next day I came in with a new strategy. I was going to work the room, okay? And I walked around. How can I help you? Boy, you look really tired. It looks like you can use a water. Let me give you a bottle of water. And it was all stuff that I learned from 9/11. It was all stuff that I learned from the plane crashes. I said, I'm not going to sit there and do nothing a whole day. I'm going to put my skills to use. And he did. So that was one thing. One of the incredible things was, as I had a woman that she suffered from, I don't know the right terminology, and forgive me, dwarfism, is that correct? Politically correct and diagnostically correct? I'm not sure. And she lost all her assisted devices. And I said, well, how are we going to help her to do that? I talked to the Red Cross. They didn't have a cash award. What I did was I called my friend Eileen Bryan, who is the director of disaster mental health for the Red Cross. I says, Eileen, how do I deal with this? Okay, and I had to kind of think on my feet. And she says, call the United Way and get a grant from the United Way. She did. So what I did was I had to do concrete services. I'm a social worker. I don't do concrete services. I haven't done that in years, and I had to do that. So I had to many times think outside the box. Okay, so that was one thing. The settings were quite different. So one was the Orange County Fire Command. The other was a fire station in Putnam, and I think it was Cold Springs, if I remember. And there was one that was out in the field. I was in a tent, and there was FEMA vehicles there, and that's what we worked out of. I was there for a couple of days, and each environment was quite different. Also, what was important is how do you take care of yourself? Well, what about after hours? I had no friends there. I had nobody there. I had to figure out what I was going to do. I remember one time I went to the Middletown Mall and I went to the movies. I was the only one in the movie theater. I said, this is kind of weird, but I did that. And you know what? I said, I'm okay. I'm going to watch the movie and I'm going to enjoy myself. And I don't care if the only one but here. So you had to be creative. You had to be flexible.
Thanks, Monty.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I heard two themes around being flexible and working the room. You can't just sit at the table.
Yes.
Christine, please introduce yourself and respond to the questions below. Thank you.
Sure, yes. So for those I haven't met yet, I'm Dr. Christine Bartholome. I am the statewide director of psychology for OMH's state operated services. And my first deployment was back in 2021. It was from the remnants of Hurricane Ida, caused a lot of loss of life and property destruction. It's pretty significant. What I was most surprised by, I know I just listened to all of you say this over and over again, so it shouldn't have been a surprise. And I am a psychologist, which is why I thought it was important that I said this. Even as a psychologist, I didn't realize the level of self-care that I was really going to need to manage my own response to the secondary trauma, because we were hearing a lot of trauma, we were seeing it, and going home with it, sitting with it, I needed to actually take care of myself, acknowledge that it was challenging, that there was a lot of loss of lives, loss of pets, loss of homes. So managing that, I had to be kind to myself, right? And give myself permission that even if I'm a director of psychology, I'm still a human who has a lot of empathy for these people, and that empathy goes somewhere. So as many times as you all say it, I'm saying it too. Take care of yourself while you're doing this, and don't be afraid to say, wow, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. And my takeaway is that lifesavers are a lifesaver. I also agree that you have to work the room. People do, when especially, maybe different situations are different, but at a disaster response center, they're coming in to connect to FEMA. They're coming in to connect to the Red Cross. They're not coming in to manage their mental health when they're worried about life-saving needs. But they need you, right? So I was much more comfortable walking up to someone and saying, here, can I offer you this? So we had a lot of the 988 or the materials, maybe not 988, it was the Project Hope materials. A lot of that, I also brought in materials. I photocopied coloring sheets and little, like easy little puzzles. I brought in lifesavers and other types of candy so that I could walk around and say, hey, can I give you this? Hey, would you like a candy? And that was my way of engaging people. Those are my takeaways.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much for each of you sharing, and I hope that all of us are hearing this and taking this information to heart, because if you have not deployed yet, you will at some point. And so this is very valuable. Thank you again, Dr. Tasato, Dr. Bartholome, and Monty Posner. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That was great. And we will have some time for questions at the end, but we're going to have one more topic, and we'll pitch this back to Latifa again to talk just briefly about resources and supplies that'll be available to you as mentioned.
Yeah, so again, you'll be interacting with a lot of people, and you want to be able to provide them with information. So we'll have whatever local resources are available. We want to have that information where you can hand out to folks. And where possible, certainly we'll have it in various languages. Handouts for survivors, things that are helpful for themselves as well as for parents and caregivers, so they can understand, you know, what are some common stress reactions that they may experience or that their children may experience. Handouts for us as well. Dr. Bartholome just talked about self-care, some reminders, sometimes we need that. Any additional supplies, coloring books and crayons, plush animals, you kind of see the pictures here on the slide. Those are great tools of engagement. Fidget toys, stress balls. We'll bring, at times we'll have vests available. And additionally, if you haven't already received them, OMH responders will be receiving fleece as well as polo shirts. So again, if you haven't yet received them, they're on the way as long as you completed a clothing form. Again, any forms that are required to be filled out, we'll provide those as well. And we are still working on developing the DMH SharePoint. Once that's available, we will give everyone access to it. And so I am going to turn this back over to Skip, and thank you everyone again.
All right. Thank you, Latifa. So we have about 5 minutes left, maybe 6 minutes left. We are finished with the formal portion. I want to thank all of our facilitators. I want to thank our 3 guests for your input and your experience. We have a little bit of time for questions now, and I think our team will stay on as long as folks want to field other questions if you'd like to have a deeper conversation. But any questions popping up for you now based on what we've talked about today? You can unmute or you can put something into the chat if you'd like to. Now I can see the chat, so that's good. Well, hearing no questions, then I think we can probably end our formal program today. We will stay on if anybody would like to stick around a little bit. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for an hour and a half out of your day today. And thank you for being such engaging and engaged responders in disaster mental health. We cannot do this project at all without you. And we're so grateful for your commitment to it and for your willingness to be part of the plan. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next Learning Collaborative, and there will be others announced for the future. We do have one more in November on this topic, deployment, and then we'll have other ones for the 2025 year as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
being with
Have a
us.
good day.
And we can stop recording now too. And
Thank you.
Everyone.